The Shemitah is a day that was celebrated and understood throughout the world. It was the number one hit for about 2 years. It was predicted that there would be some type of destruction in Israel between 2014 and 2016. 2014 to 15 was considered to be the Shemitah. The Jews have 7 years, and at the 7th year is a Shemitah. It's a holy year, and they're not supposed to plant their crops, and they're supposed to live differently. And the following year, every 49 years, there's a 50th year of Jubilee. So there are 2 years in a row that are supposed to be holy years. And these particular years that they had predicted were also holding signs within the sky. They were signs of blood moons, and the sun should be darkened and the moon should turn to blood. And therefore, many people felt that these were the signs that were coming for the coming of the day of the Lord, and that destruction would occur in Israel. I was also one of the people who believed that, and I was on the George Norrie show in the fall of 2013, and it received over 500,000 hits on Google. In fact, I was surprised that it had about 4 or 5 times as many thumbs up as their top people. But the problem is the date came and nothing happened. So I went to look out and find out what went wrong. And I found that the internet is now buzzing with the fact that the rabbis chose the wrong date. And there's strong reason to believe that the new date will still be accompanying these cataclysmic events heading for Israel and for Jerusalem. The new calendar is based on Josephus's calendar. It's not really a new calendar. It's been there all along. And according to his years, he had a 50-year cycle for the calendars. There are 49 years, and then there's a 50th year of Jubilee, and there's been a question with rabbis as to whether the 50th year of Jubilee was also to be the first of the next segment. So that would, even though you're having a 50th year of Jubilee, you'd only have 49-year cycles. And Josephus stated that that wasn't true. He explained that there was a 600-year cycle, a great cycle. He says, Josephus wrote of a great cycle of 600 years that was in Antiquities 139. The great cycle is equal to 12 Jubilee cycles. 572 BC was the time of Ezekiel's vision, and it indicated that that was a Jubilee. And then you counted forward in time to the date that Christ began his ministry, was what Jubilee said. The Jubilee marked the commencement of Jesus' ministry, occurring in a pace with a time span that encompassed 12 Jubilee cycles or 600 years. So if you would start at 572 BCE to make 600 years, you would think that would be the year 28 CE, but instead there was supposed to be a 0 year that would correspond. So the timing then for this Jubilee would have been the time that Jesus began his ministry in 27, they now call that CE, but Common Era. And so the idea here is now if you would multiply the 50 years again, go 2,000 years forward, we would be looking at 2027, or the Shemitah the year before, which is a holy year also, would be 2026, and it would still be right on our horizon. And this is important because this allows, with this dating, the events that are prophesied in the Bible to still come to place, speaking of an impending war. That the impending war has to do with the time when a lion out of Syria will attack. Assad's name means lion, and he's supposed to attack with his sons, who are cubs. And if we had gone another 50 years from the Jubilee that they had scheduled, they wouldn't be cubs anymore. But if we were to go forward instead to the year 2026 and 2027, they would be cubs, and the prophesied events of the Bible could still take place. The Bible speaks of an appointed time for a coming war. It is supposed to be a war that will be a Shemitah with following of a Jubilee year. And in that time, it's also prophesied that there'll be a woe for Ariel. Ariel is a name of Jerusalem, and in Isaiah 28, and 29, there's a story of a coming war. Finally, in Isaiah 29, it says, "Woe, O Ariel, the city where David once camped. Add year to year. Observe your feasts on schedule." And then it goes on and talks about the events that are supposed to come, speaking of a war that's supposed to come and is prophesied for that date. So the adding of the year to year indicates that Israel, in particular Jerusalem, will not have the right date, that they will not have added the years right to have understood that there was a Jubilee War and that Jubilee War was supposed to affect them. And so what we're trying to do now is add these years and see how they relate, but also see how that is supposed to affect us in the coming events, and to understand what is it that we're supposed to do, who's going to help us, who will help us to understand this timing, who will help us to understand this coming events, who will help us to understand this war, and our teachers are supposed to appear. As we go on in Isaiah 29, it talks about a time that there are supposed to be events taking place, and the teachers are supposed to appear. The Isaiah Pesher within the Dead Sea Scrolls is a Pesher, or an interpretation of the book of Isaiah. And in speaking of Isaiah 30, it talks about a certain passage. The Isaiah Pesher is called 4Q Isaiah Pesher 4Q162, and also 4QPLSB. And here we're noting the statement in Isaiah where it says, "Yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more, but thine eyes shall see thy teachers. Thine eyes shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it, when ye turn to the right hand, and when you turn to the left." And in this commentary that they have, the Pesher that's within the Dead Sea Scrolls, they note the Zadokite priests. And it goes on and it says, the reason, it says, "The bread of the increase of the earth, and it shall be fat and plenteous." And what we're talking about here are the true priests of Israel that placed bread in the earth in the form of scrolls. They are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the scrolls that were sealed up till the time of the end. And we want to discuss these scrolls because a lot of people don't realize that the scrolls at the Dead Sea are the sealed up information for the time of the end, for the saints of the Most High to know what to do. In fact, Enoch was the earliest copy of Enoch we find within the Dead Sea Scrolls. It doesn't have all of it. We'll read from other sources. But it speaks of the fact that Enoch, as we're opening the book, it tells you that he is writing to the saints at the time of the end who will be there for the time of Jacob's trouble, when the Lord will come with 10,000s of his saints. And he goes on and he tells you that he has writings within the scrolls that tells you how the writings got passed down to Noah, how they get passed down to the rest of the forefathers, finally how they wind up within this catch of the sealed up information for the end time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We'll be going on and speaking also of the vision of Daniel in the book of Daniel, how he was told to seal things up until the end time, and understand how it was a custom to seal things up until the end time. We'll notice, first of all, that in a book called The Assumption of Moses, Moses said, "And receive this writing, that you may know how to preserve the books which I shall deliver to you. And you shall set these in order, and anoint them with oil of cedar, and put them away in earthen vessels." So now we have found earthen vessels by the Dead Sea, and a lot of things have gone to take place. At first, people said, well, we think they're from this community we call now Qumran, based on the modern-day name of the Arabs for this area. It would have been called Sakakia, and it was in an area connected to a greater area of Damascus at one time. And at first, we would say, well, gee, how do we know these scrolls are connected to this Qumran community, which was by the Dead Sea? And at first they just guessed. They said, okay, well, there's a scrollery here at the Dead Sea, And they obviously wrote scrolls there, and the ink matched the scrolls within the caves. And so we can see that all of this is connected. But recently they found within the substrata of the building a scroll within a jar and money from a man who was an initiate who had, it stated he had placed his money there until the time of his initiation would be over, and that initiation matched that which was within the community rule and within the Damascus document for the charter for this group. And therefore we now have confirmation that the scrolls that are sealed in jars are in fact the scrolls that are all around this community, are the scrolls that they preserved. Note that they did preserve them in the earth, and therefore when it says the bread from the earth shall be rich in Isaiah, this is speaking of that this is the daily bread not only of what you eat but of what you read, and that is supposed to be what's going to be rich. Now when it speaks of the Zadokite priests, that was the true priests of Israel, and there's a lineage of priesthood, and also there's a lineage of passing of the scrolls. A lot of people, when I was in Israel and I started talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls to a scholar, he had a whole team of people coming with him. He was some great person giving them all advice. And I said, what do you think of the Dead Sea Scrolls? And he said, oh, yes, that's pseudeographic literature. You know, some guy had a vision and thought he was Daniel and wrote stuff. Some guy thought he had a vision, thought he was Abraham and wrote stuff. It couldn't be the real people. But as we're reading these scrolls within the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find that we have the last testament of each of the forefathers, and in this testament, one passing on to another, we find that they are passed the scrolls of Enoch and also the scrolls, as they would collect them, of each of the ancients being passed down as well. This is a marvelous find just in regular teaching, in that, first of all, they have the earliest scrolls we've ever found, sometimes by thousands of years, and these scrolls prove that we haven't had people just doctor up our Bible. They haven't made things. They haven't added things in. They haven't changed things. People have respected the Word of God. And in general, our Bible is pretty close to what their Bible is. There may be a few extra things that they had that got missed in copying, but overall it's the same. And that makes it the biggest find ever, proving the source of religion of faith of really three world religions. But now, when we go to look at the passing of these scrolls, I want to read some of the passing so we can see what we're reading within the scrolls, that these passages passed from one to another. Also, within the catch of the scrolls, then there's going to be advice of how to deal with this coming war. They call it a war of revision. The 1QM War Scroll is a war that is based on this war of revision. Seventh year would be a sabbatical year. Revision is a sabbatical year. And the Jubilee would be a sabbatical year as well. Now, a war of revision might happen any seventh year, but there's reason to believe why they said that this was not just going to be a seventh year. It was going to be a seventh year that included a Jubilee. Another statement that they're saying that proves that this was a year of Jubilee is the fact that Jesus, when he went into the synagogue, said that he had come to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the acceptable year of the Lord would have been the Jubilee. So we can accept that Jesus was in the year of Jubilee, proclaiming the Jubilee, and as he was doing that, he was quoting Isaiah 61, which has to do with a Messiah and Jesus sat down and he said, this day has been fulfilled. Well, not only did Jesus speak of the acceptable day of the coming of the Lord for him coming as the Lord, but that date now is now the date that they're choosing to choose the coming of the day of the Lord, this Jubilee that is now coming on. That it can now date the next Jubilee, that being 27 AD, and the next Shemitah being 26 AD. It's all connected to this Isaiah 61 prophecy where it's speaking of Jesus being the one. Not only did he speak of that, but this redemption and resurrection scroll spoke of it as well.